everyone. We're here to talk about how to fix the internet. There's a lot of different types of problems that we've been grappling with all day today, but one that's sort of an infrastructure and security tie-in. It has to do with foundational issues in how the internet was established, how it's grown, and how things from many years ago are intersecting with how massive and impactful the internet has gotten today. So with me on the panel is Katie Jordan, to my right. She's a senior policy advisor for North America for the Internet Society, which is a nonprofit that does public policy, access issues, security and privacy, and standards issues. To her right is Matthew Prince, co-founder and CEO of the internet infrastructure company CloudFlare, which works on a lot of these issues. And to his right is John Curran, president and CEO of the American Registry for Internet Numbers, or ARIN, which is a trade association that administers IP addresses and ASNs in Canada, the US, and parts of the Caribbean. Thank you all for joining me on the panel today. So, there have been a lot of outages, issues with cryptocurrency being stolen. These have both been nefarious incidents and accidental issues, and they can cause outages with big platforms, big companies, but really they're stemming from something deeper, from what I think of as sort of the GPS of the internet, or the Border Gateway Protocol, which is routing things across all these different networks that intersect so that the internet doesn't need to be sort of adjudicated or administered by one overarching body, and so it can be distributed. But in the process of every network collaborating in this project and using the BGP protocol to figure out these routes, we can have all sorts of problems, right? So, John, maybe you could talk first a little bit about BGP and what's good about it, what has been...
Sure. Happy to be here. So, the internet is actually made up of a lot of pieces, and everyone owns a small piece of it. Every ISP, every major enterprise, every government, every institution runs their own little piece of the network. And there's some 50,000 distinct systems we track, autonomous systems we call them. That's a piece of the internet that's routed and connected to all of the others. So a major network might be an autonomous system or a university or a government agency. And the fact is, they don't all connect directly to each other. They connect through one another to get there. So you might connect to, your major university may connect to 2 upstream internet providers. Your AS connects to them, and they in turn might connect to thousands of customers, some of whom are their own routing. So the way the routing works is that everyone maintains a table of how to get to all of those systems, all of the various pockets of routers on the internet. We have numbers for all of them, IP addresses and autonomous system numbers. My organization, ARIN, is the one that administers those and issues them to the companies. And the fact is, there's tables, routing tables, on when you get a packet, where you send it. How do you get to each of those 50,000 different networks? Now, when the internet was first going, there was only one real backbone. It was the National Science Foundation. It was a funded backbone. We then went to 5 different backbones, 5 commercial backbones, and now we have many, many backbones. And the fact is, we trust each other. You rely on the networks you connect to tell you who they connect to. And you guess they're telling you the truth. Every now and then, someone either misconfigures or lies and says, I can get there. And you go, okay, I'll send all my traffic. And all of the internet pays attention to someone who says he can get to the particular network. And all the traffic for that network, instead of going to the destination, follows the miscreant or the person with the typo in the other part of the world who's saying he's the right path there. A famous case several decades ago was Someone in Florida said that they could handle traffic for the network that was MIT, and all the traffic that should have went to Cambridge, Mass, ended up going to a small ISP in Florida who very quickly got overloaded and went completely off the air because of so much traffic. It was a typo. But the fact is, the way this works is trust. We trust one another to say who you can get to. Well, one of the things we're going to be talking about later is something called RPKI, which is a public key certificate mechanism to allow parties to say authoritatively, here's the internet companies that I'm connected to. Here's the ones who can announce a route back to me. And the others, if you get that, ignore it. It's not going to validate. And if we did that, we can eliminate some of the typos and some of what's called route hijackings that occurs in the internet.
Yeah, so if we have these trust issues going on, Matthew, can you talk a little more about what are some of the ideas for what we could do about this? You know, what's the idea? What's the vision?
You know, I think that at many levels, the internet is a miracle. The fact that it works at all is pretty incredible, and it was never designed to do what we've asked it to do. And if you go back and you read the original specifications for this protocol that holds the fundamentals of the internet, like, you know, Facebook is up here and then the web is below that, but this is down in the absolute bowels of the internet. This protocol that holds the internet together.
And famously drawn out on napkins.
Drawn out on napkins, like literally. And there's a section in the original protocol specification for security, and it says this section to be completed later.
And here we are.
And here we are. So many times, so many of the panels today are talking about kind of all the horrible things that are happening online. And what I am encouraged by in this conversation is this is a tangible thing that we as companies connected to the internet can do. It doesn't cost really anything. There's some implementation cost, but it's not you don't have to go buy something new. The routers that everyone are using already support what it needs to be done, and all we just need to do as an industry is have the will to do it. And so what is it that we need to do? The first step is we need to just go in and say definitively, these are the IP addresses, these are the routes that sit on my network, and I attest to that and sign it and make that those that I have control over. And once that foundation is in place, then we can start to build on top of that real security that is a part of it. And so at CloudFlare, you know, our networking team saw this and said we should be leaders here, and we should go forward and do this, and really stepped up and did that for our own systems. I think companies like Amazon and Google have really been leaders in this as well. But what I'm especially encouraged by is that you're now seeing even some of the big network providers like AT&T really taking a lead and saying, we're going to put this in place. And if we can get this implemented where we actually are signing the routes, this is one of the good news stories in cybersecurity, which unfortunately there aren't enough of. But this is an opportunity for us to significantly increase the security of the internet and fix what's been a bug since the very first packets were exchanged across the early backbone.
So Katie, if one of the solutions we're talking about here is route authentication, maybe getting to filtering eventually and just sort of establishing these best practices and norms, is that something that all the ISPs, all big and small, all these organizations are just doing on their own and we're all good and everybody's clamoring to be first to show that they did it? Or do we need some type of collaboration and industry movement to make it happen?
So there's an element of companies doing this on their own. They want to protect their networks. You have a vested interest in that. But there does absolutely need to be coordination between the different service providers and internet exchange points, cloud providers, and things like that to make sure that we all have an established set of best practices that we're all following. Because if my network is secure and I peer with your network, and your network is not secure, then we both have a problem. And so it really is, you have an ecosystem where everyone relies very heavily on everyone else doing the right thing. And so the Internet Society actually has worked very hard on that element of routing security for many years now through a program called Manners. It's the Mutually Agreed Norms for Routing Security. And essentially, this is a collaborative process whereby internet service providers, internet exchange points, and soon cloud providers have created a set of best practices that they want everyone to follow. We call them our critical actions that they all have to take. And as a result, these groups are becoming more secure because they're all following the same kind of guidelines. And the action steps are really quite simple. They're pretty basic things. I mean, for internet service providers, it's you should filter out the content, filter out the networks that are not who they say they are. You should prevent spoofing. You should have your contact information somewhere so that if your network does something wrong, we know who to call. And you should also have a mechanism of validation to make sure that your data, your information can be checked by everyone else. And it's been a really, really exciting project because it is growing quickly, because I think we're not the only ones that recognize that it's very important to work together to make everyone else's networks more secure.
John, what have been some of the challenges to adoption, though? That I think all is moving forward, and some of the collaboration has been really amazing, but it's really complicated in practice, right, to get everyone on the same page.
Yeah, happy to talk about that. In the past, I was the CTO of GT Internetworking, organization that became Genuity eventually, a nationwide ISP. I was the CTO of EXO Communications. So I've had a lot of network engineers working for me over the years. And I've spoken to a lot of them about improving their routing security. The particular one that we've been talking about is the RPKI initiative doing route validation. And it's not difficult to implement. As Matt said, there's two phases of it. The first one is you publish some policy. You say, here is my networks and who's allowed to route them. And that's pretty straightforward. The other side of it is the validation. So you begin listening to all of those announcements, all those attestations, all those records, what we call ROAs, routing attestations, and you begin filtering the routing you're receiving. Well, as it turns out, that's really exciting because you're actively setting up a system that throws out connectivity. It takes good routing or nominally good routing, decides it's not good, and filters it away. And most of the time, there's very little bad routing. But you're setting a system up which, if somehow misconfigured, could throw out a lot more routing than you intended. Instead of just throwing out a small amount of routing that doesn't match the filters, if you make a mistake, you could throw out big pieces of connectivity. So the engineers who are configuring these systems, they want to do it, but they recognize to do it right takes a lot of work. Also, the world isn't perfect. So right now, the internet runs today just fine, except when there's hijacking, except when there's typos on routing. Well, you're setting up an extra system to validate the routing using cryptology. And that's a great thing, but it might not be available one day. There might be power outages. There may be a connectivity problem. You can't set yourself up assuming that that's always going to be there, because it may not. And so you have to fall back gracefully. We expect most operators will do this, will configure our PKI correctly. When we're looking at the track record, though, 2 or 3% of the ones that are doing it don't quite get there the first time. And so if you're a CEO and you ask your network team, what are you doing? Oh, we're building belts and suspenders on our routing so that we validate it and we make sure that no one hijacks it. Great. Oh, but if we make a mistake, 2 or 3% of the time, we may take out perfectly good routing by accident and disconnect customers. You don't mind, right? As a CEO, you scratch your head and go, I'm not sure I like that trade-off. I don't want to have a protection scheme that isn't going to help me and may actually hurt me. So getting it right, deploying it is pretty easy, but getting it right takes diligent work. And when that's all presented, the network engineers in the organizations who want to do this, they say, I want to do it right, but it's work. It gets prioritized with all the other security work. We've sat through many interesting presentations today. People talk about all the security issues and all the things you can do. Every organization has a list of, here's the security tasks that I'm still waiting to get done. Well, RPKI and route validation goes on that list to get prioritized with everything else. It's not that they don't want to do it, it's how much resources am I willing to put in this compared to everything else on my list of what to do.
I think what we have to make sure that we understand, though, is that the way that every network is set up today, basically, means that you're not in control of when your network is actually being routed correctly. It means that if someone at China Telecom says that they control your IP addresses, then all of your traffic is going to go to China Telecom. And that's usually done as a mistake, but this is potentially a real security issue for every organization on Earth today. And so as we're setting those priorities, we have to understand that the world as it is today, you have no control over where your routes are. This process gives organizations that control. And the challenge of that is then if the organization makes a mistake, then they bear responsibility for that. But we have to recognize that the way that networks are set up today, you don't have any responsibility for your network. And you can have your routes hijacked. And unless we put this in place, that is going to continue to be the case. And while we're an engineering-driven company, and one of the challenges of working with engineers is they always want the perfect solution. This is, again, one of those opportunities where, with relatively easy work, we can make good incremental progress to solidify the security of how the internet works. And any step toward that is going to make the internet as a whole much, much better. And I think what I'm encouraged by is, again, that you see for a long time, major telecoms were very hesitant to put this in place. And I think that the turning point has happened within the last 12 months. And AT&T, I think, deserves real applause for the work that they've done to show that this is possible. And we're starting to see that other major telecoms are coming on board. And so I think that this has been something that people have said, I don't know, this seems like it doesn't work unless everyone does it, and are we really going to get to that level? And now it seems clear that that is the direction that we're headed, and there's a real opportunity, again, for us to make real progress on securing the core foundation of how the internet works.
Your first point's really important too, though, because if there is an incident in Kenya, it could impact the traffic in the UK, which could impact the traffic in Mexico, and vice versa. So this has to be a global effort. Just because we do things really well in the States does not mean that we as a nation or our businesses and our networks are completely secure. And I mean, I think that's something that Manners does really well, is that it is a global effort. And I swear I won't talk about Manners the entire time, but it's really, really important that we start collaborating across borders on things like this, because we're quite literally all in this together.
Yep.
Well, and those cascades are a big part, like a hallmark of BGP when these types of incidents happen, right? Everyone has to trace back and see, well, what's really going on, who's really the progenitor of, right?
And it's, we had an incident earlier this year where there was a Nigerian telecommunications company that, as part of China's Belt and Road Initiative, China Telecom connected to, they had a misconfigured router. That route from that Nigerian telecom propagated through China Telecom, and in the process took a significant portion of Google's traffic and routed it all basically to Nigeria. And so the internet is inherently connected together, and unless we have some sort of system that says these IP addresses belong to the Nigerian telecom, these belong to Google, these belong to China Telecom, and we specify that, then the risk is that any misconfiguration or any intentional hijacking anywhere in the world can potentially impact everyone in the world. And that's why this is so critical for us to get done.
Yeah. I agree with Matt. In fact, when you asked about the challenges, while there are challenges and there are concerns about making sure this is deployed correctly, I do believe we're building momentum. We're seeing a lot of progress in the last year. we're seeing a higher level of interest. Now, it is true that the interest is at the more significant providers, the core of the internet. And what people don't realize is that the internet has many, many, many ISPs. We all know the big mobile operators. We all know the big broadband operators who deliver cable and fiber to the home. But there's many, many smaller ISPs. And we need to get the message out more. We need to get it actually to enterprise and government and universities, because in some ways, the customer is the one who drives this. The customers need to ask, is your routing secure? If someone in Asia announces my route, are you going to suddenly lose all my traffic? Or are you announcing my route securely? Are you validating other routes? And the problem is that it's very hard to, we all know what the internet is, right? We know what the internet is. Well, we do, but we don't have a specification, and we don't have people. When you go and buy a computer or you go and buy a car, you think, does it have cup holders? Does it have mirrors? Does it have a sound system I like? But when you buy internet service, well, I'm buying internet service. It's internet service. It's the same everywhere. We're going to need to get education so that people actually value and actually begin asking the questions, particularly enterprise, particularly governments. They can ask the question, how secure is your routing? Are you deploying these technologies?
Katie, do you think that part of the issue is, or sort of, is it more the liability or the responsibility that people, feel like they need to take on in order to do this, and that's what the decades of sort of hesitance have been about? Or is it more that sort of waiting for, I'm going to see how it goes with the bigger provider, and then, maybe I'm smaller, maybe just sort of risk averse or something, and, what's the interplay of those things? Because I think the responsibility point that Matthew was making earlier is really interesting. Could explain why it's been so long. I mean, we're really talking about decades here.
Yeah, sure. I think part of it is the liability issue. I mean, you certainly don't want to be the one that's responsible for taking Google's traffic through China or taking it offline completely. That's not a very good look for your service provider. But part of it is, too, I think, that the more incidents we see, the more real this becomes for both consumers and for those providers, including the small providers like you're talking about. And it's interesting, actually. I do a lot of work on access issues in the US and Canada as well, and we work really closely with community networks. And more communities, as they decide to create their own network, are saying, well, what's the security element? How do I make sure that my community is safe and that our networks are safe? And that's very new, because it's in the news all the time. And this is, the public's awareness and the conversations are starting to change. So, from my perspective, it's coming from both levels. Mm-hmm. From kind of the public up, where there's an awareness and a concern about what security really means, and also from the top down saying, I don't want my name splashed across, newspapers in 7 continents saying I've done something really terrible to the internet.
Yeah.
It's also true, if you think about it, while it has been decades that we haven't secured the routing, and it's been on a trust basis, oh, you carry that, I'll give you the traffic. Congratulations, Matt, carry it. We don't actually ask him to validate, and it's been that way for decades. It's only really been possible to do this in the last 5 years. The IETF, the Internet Engineering Task Force that develops the standards, looked at this about 10, 12 years ago, did a specification. There's been technological work, and it ended up being deployed and put so you can deploy this software and do this technology changes as an ISP reliably in the last 3 to 5 years. And so that's enabled people to say, I actually can fix this problem. Combined with, we are seeing an increase in the number of routing configuration errors. It's very hard to distinguish between a routing configuration error and an intentional miscreant hijack. But one way or the other, we're seeing more incidents. We don't know if there's intent behind them or not. So people are looking at the increase in the incidents, the availability of a tool, and they're thinking, wow, I should do this. And if I do it and everyone else does that, we can actually eliminate a whole class of problems for the internet.
Well, and it's, I think that if you start to think about it, it's terrifying. I could to any organization probably on Earth right now, just kidnap all their traffic.
Right.
Anyone, every single person in this room. Like, you want to take over the U.S. government's traffic. That any big network operator is able to do that, and I think that again that's just a core flaw in how the internet was designed. The internet was a miracle. It's amazing that it's gotten us to where it is, but now that it is part of the critical infrastructure that we have, it's the right time for us all to be saying, okay, what are the inherent bugs of the internet? And the fact that this is out there, we have to fix, because otherwise, no firewall that you buy is going to protect you from this. No piece of software that you buy is going to protect you from this. Every single organization on Earth is vulnerable to this. And if I were to predict what is the cause of the cyber 9/11, it's going to be something to do with BGP. And so, again, this is one of the most critical flaws in how the internet works today. And the good news is, you don't have to buy anything to fix it. We don't have to invent something new to fix it. We know what the solution is. What we need to do is have the will in the organizations to say, okay, this is a priority. My organization is at risk unless I do this. And we, starting with the big operators and the big telecoms, are going to take the lead. But now we're at a point where every organization that's online needs to put this in place. And if we do that, then this is something that we can measure. This is something that we can track. This is something that we can make real progress on. And I think this is why this is a perfect initiative for the Aspen Institute to be taking on. And a year from now, I'd predict that we'll have made significant progress making the internet a more secure and more stable place.
Yeah, right on. Sounds good. Is there any concern about deploying this as RPKI and other best practices are more and more widely adopted? Is there any thought that needs to be given to how those measures will be defended against sort of next generation attacks that are adapting to these defenses? Or is it more that it's going to sort of cut out so much low-hanging fruit, as you guys are describing, that threat actors or the mistakes would be heavily reduced, and threat actors would kind of go somewhere else because it would be easier? John, do you?
It's an interesting question. So, as it turns out, it's exactly as Matthew said. Any major operator right now can inject routes for someone who's not their customer and get the traffic for that customer routed to them instead of to the ISP that's actually handling it. And so we have that happen now and then, as I said. The good news is it's generally noticeable. There's actually an Observatory initiative that I should talk about. But we can see when that happens. So the good news here is we actually have some idea about how often this occurs. And it is not as if there's lots of attacks. It's noticeable when it occurs. So I don't think there's a groundswell of cybersecurity incidents today that if we solve this, we'll move into another mode. I really don't think that's the case. I do think it's more like Matthew said, that this has been a latent problem as the internet's grown bigger and bigger. The fact that every ISP doesn't know all the other ISPs suddenly becomes a lot more important. It wasn't 20 years ago, but now it's critical that any ISP can do this, and there's so many of them. And now the real problem is that it's not, is there a little attack here or a little incident here? It's that this exposure, sooner or later, someone's going to really make an incident out of it. You could cause large-scale outages that would be very hard to solve. We need to solve that before someone decides to take advantage of it.
Yeah, and I think that, I guess I would turn that around and I would say, again, if you go back to the early protocols of the internet, this isn't the only one that has flaws in it. The fact that DNS isn't encrypted is insane, right? It means that everyone connected to the Wi-Fi here, we can see, the Wi-Fi here can see every single thing that you're doing in every site that you go to, even if there's the little green lock in your browser. that's insane. So we need to fix that too. But if our job isn't done when we solve this problem. But boy, this is such low-hanging fruit. This is such a no-brainer to get done, and the internet becomes so much more secure once we have this foundation in place. And so I think that we'll be back next year saying, well, we made a bunch of progress on this, but now we've got to look at DNS. Now we've got to look at other parts of the system that just really were never designed to be part of critical infrastructure the way that we're now asking them to. And attackers will continue to look at things. But right now, if as we step off stage, the internet goes offline, and someone says, what's your guess of what caused it? The answer is going to be BGP.
Right.
And this is the biggest threat to the underlying security and sanctity of internet, like globally. And it's something that we can make tangible progress solving within the next 12 months, and without you having to buy anything new, without you having to do anything else. But we need the will, starting at the top of organizations, to say, like, I know that there's risk here, but and I know that there's some chance we might misconfigure something in the short term, but that risk is worth taking because it will make the internet as a whole and our organization more secure.
I also think it's very important to note that the internet is constantly evolving. So the second we say that problem is finished and now we never need to look at it again, right, is the day that we have some sort of catastrophic event like what you're talking about. I mean, there is, in my mind, there's no way that any of these problems are ever completely solved, and that's why it's so important to collaborate and continuously work together to figure out what is the next best practice, what is the next thing we have to try or the next thing we have to do to continue to make sure we get to use this tool, and that future generations get to use this incredible tool. I also want to take a second to talk about the Observatory that you mentioned. So one of the reasons that I think Manners, at least, is gaining a lot of traction, and we've doubled our membership in the last year alone, is because we've created an observatory that was created with, my background is policy, and I can use this tool just as well as our engineers can, which is really exciting for me. But this tool allows you to see all of the different service providers and the ASs globally and how they're performing, who's having an incident, what kind of incident they're having, where did it originate, where did it go, and to compare by region or by country for the public, and if you're an actual Manners member, to get really granular and see how do each of my systems perform, and how does every other Manners member perform, and how does everyone else that I peer with perform, and if there is a problem, very easily be able to go to that person and say, you're having an incident right now, or you continue to have incidents, or we're worried you may have an incident, let's figure this out before it's a problem. And I hope that that's going to be a system that continues to allow us to evolve and address problems as they arrive, as we get more data and more different pieces to that infrastructure, to that platform.
Yeah, it's interesting that it can be used both reactively as something is happening to trace it, and also proactively to say, to go to others and say, maybe we could work on this together. I've had success with this. We've all had, maybe you can try that. So I think that sort of seems like the type of tool that's needed, so everyone can be on the same page. Though you don't really want to be getting that call that's like, hey, I see you have a big thing going on.
Exactly. I mean, it's both kind of a celebration of those that do things well, and it's an opportunity for those who are not doing things well to identify those
diplomatic
problems.
way. I was also wondering about the point you were making before about how there are opportunities when new infrastructure is being built out, whether it's through a new organization or through an existing ISP or what have you, expanding or changing their infrastructure, that there's an opportunity to sort of build in security more from the ground level, as opposed to just this really ancient historic infrastructure where the mindset was really different when it was put in place, things like that. John, it seemed like you were nodding.
Yeah.
I'm curious your thoughts about how people can prioritize as they're.
It's interesting. Matthew earlier said it's amazing the internet works. We've built a lot of layers of protocols on the internet. Started out with very simple communication protocols, and then increased the routing, and then we increased how the DNS worked, and we added DNS security, and then we changed how, layer by layer, we've been adding more and more. The whole web is a whole nother layer. And so when you go talk to a new ISP, or you go talk to an emerging community, under a less served community and a community network, and you say, do you want to set up an ISP? One of the things you have to deal with is the fact that there's a lot of pieces. It's not as easy as it was 10 years ago or 20 years ago, because some of these extra things have servers that have to be set up, or equipment, or configuration. So it's not just turning on RPKI and doing route validation that we need to do. We also need to make it so that that happens automatically, so that when someone sets up a new ISP, that's just considered normal and is something that's easy to do when they're getting their equipment and setting it up. That's a little further goal, but it's very important, because otherwise, I deal with this with many technologies where we actually have changed the internet protocol from IPv4 to IPv6. None of you know it, but half of you are using an internet protocol that's an upgraded one. And we have to be very careful, because we want to make sure when we do these technology changes that people are able to use them and they don't have to go through extra measures. It has to be built in, organic, it has to be already there. Well, RPKI is in most of the ISP's routers equipment. It's not turned on by default. So we have to get this out there, and then we have to make it so that this is normally, rather than something you have to go turn on and enable, it's something that works right out of the box. And that'll be the next hurdle to do. Otherwise, we set up a barrier for someone who's a new ISP, a new entrant, one more thing they have to configure, and we don't want to do that.
Right.
One of the most exciting things, though, about new ISPs and community networks is that the rest of us have kind of evolved along with the internet. Our service providers are figuring it out as they go along. But there's no reason why a new network, especially a community network, shouldn't get to start where we are right now,
Right.
instead of having to relearn all of those lessons. So there's a real opportunity for these community-driven or city-run networks to be some of the most high-tech and secure and exciting networks in our country, because they're getting to start here and they don't have to go through the pain of the beginnings.
Right. Yeah, and they can kind of leapfrog into, I thought it was a really good point that John made, or a helpful point, that a lot of these solutions weren't really technically feasible until the last few years, and that helps to, I think, explain some of the lag, which I think is just sort of baffling to all of us. So it's helpful to have something like that. Matthew, in terms of the future steps and next steps, as things like RPKI are proliferating, I understand, and Katie and John can speak to this also if you want, that Manners and other initiatives have their sights on future phases as well. How do we sort of go about getting more and more people along for the first phase, while also taking the first phase that's there into the second phase and beyond?
I think as an organization, the way that CloudFlare thinks about our role on the internet is that our mission is to help build a better internet. And that means that we have to, at many times, be kind of the leader in taking on these new challenges early, proving that it's possible, taking the tools that we built to solve it ourselves and giving those away to others, and then hopefully being a good example of what you have to do. The internet is full of chicken and egg problems, where the server guys don't want to do something because the browsers don't support it, or the browsers don't want to do something because the servers don't support it, or whatever that is. And the way that you overcome those chicken and egg problems is you have early adopters that prove that it's possible. And so, we will oftentimes set ourselves up to be one of those early adopters. And we've built a culture internally that says, yeah, even if we take that risk and it has a problem, or we learn something, that's okay. And it's okay. And we celebrate those mistakes that we learn from. and we're pushing forward our whole company, but then hopefully helping push forward how the internet as a whole runs. And so, I think that RPKI is a great first step. I think that we're really proud to have been an early adopter. I'm incredibly encouraged that we're now seeing major networks that are stepping up and starting to do that. And so, now we'll turn to the next thing. And so right now we're thinking about how do we make sure DNS is encrypted. And again, we're one of the early adopters there, but our hope is that we'll take the tools that we developed, make those available to everyone else, and hopefully, 5 years from now, everyone will be using encrypted DNS. And that's what I think you need to have, and that's what we try to celebrate internally, is how do we set ourselves up to be kind of leaders to prove these things are possible? How do we solve those chicken and egg problems? And again, what I'm super enthusiastic about is, most of the time, cybersecurity panels are all gloom and doom and terrible. This horrible thing is going to happen.
We did talk about the Cyber 9/11. So.
That's the real risk.
Yeah.
But the good news is I can tell you exactly how to solve it. Right. And we have the tools to do that. And if governments started to mandate that we will only buy services from network providers that implement RPKI, if businesses started to mandate that their networks that they connect to must support this, then I'm pretty sure that we can avoid that. And so, so I think this is actually a really good news story, that we are taking what has been this enormous latent threat, and we're actually making progress on solving it. And again, I think if we come back a year from now, we'll have made significant progress on encrypting much more of the backbone of the internet.
Okay, so you heard it here first. We solved the internet, we solved cybersecurity, and now we're going to go to a 10-minute break. Thank you guys so much for doing this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.